So I'm going to give you a couple of examples of work that Penny and I have done in the past, where we were trying to foster and also assess young children's metacognition and self-regulation. I'm going to show you an example. Penny's going to show you another example that she focused on, and then I'm going to talk to you about a range of ideas of different ways of assessing children's metacognition and self-regulation. So I sent to Luke, and he's distributed it to you, I think, a special edition of the Early Education Journal that I was asked to curate, as it were, about 4 years ago, 2016. And that talks about the nature of self-regulation, that it is in fact a combination of what are called executive functions, one of which is and that's combined with metacognition. I give the metaphor of a bicycle in the chapter, if you remember, that if you think of the chapter as the executive functions, that's got all the bits that it needs so that it'll work, but it won't do anything until you get on it and you become the kind of metacognitive bit of the cycling bit, and you're telling the bike what to do in different ways. But of course you need the bike to be functioning well for you to be able to do that. Some of the vast array of evidence we now have about the importance of children's developing self-regulation because of its impact, huge impact on academic achievement and also on children's emotional and social well-being. And also wanted to mention that particularly with obviously with younger children, with primary age children, the role of play, as well as the articulation of thinking, which I think is something that you're all been focused on very nicely, the important role of playful learning. About the evidence that metacognition works best if it's done within subjects. I think at the primary level, a better way of talking about that would be to say that it needs to be done in the context of meaningful activities for young children. And the reason for this is that to engage in metacognitive thinking is rather effortful, and one of the ways of encouraging young children to put the effort in, because they're obviously not so deliberate, capable in their general abilities to deliberately learn. It's one of the ways to help them to put more effort in and focus and concentrate is to put the task you want to do in what would be a meaningful context for children, so that they can see the purpose of what they're being asked to do. It has some purpose that makes sense to them, and it also helps if it's playful. So in today's seminar, we're going to look at two examples of activities we've shown to be highly effective in fostering young children's self-regulation. And we're going to give you some examples of ways of assessing metacognition and self-regulation in young children that you can do in the classroom. Sorry, hold on. Right, so example one is from a project. This was our best ever acronym ever. This was the Children Articulating Thinking study that Penny and I were involved in. And what we tried to do in this study was to see, were two things really. One was to see if things that have been shown to work very well with older children could still work well with young children. And in fact, this particular study was carried out with children in year one, so children who were 5 to 6 years of age. And the other thing we wanted to see would work would be to combine two particular ways of organizing activities, which seem to both in different ways support the fostering of self-regulation in children. And these two elements are described here as, first of all, as what you will know as of dialogic teaching, which is the explicit teaching of modeling and forms of dialogue that encourage thinking. And you've obviously been looking at some of that already. But the other way, so that's yourself as teacher and the children, but also collaborative problem solving between the children that encourage them to explain their reasoning and inquire about the reasoning of others. And this is something that Neil Mercer, who was in the faculty with us, we're all now retired, and Neil was also involved in the chat project, talking about particular types of talk, which I'll come on to later on. And then, aside from that, teaching children how to talk or putting them in context where they are obliged to talk or motivated to talk to one another about what they think and why they think that, there is this explicit teaching of metacognitive strategy instruction, and this involves two elements to be successful. First of all, it has to involve the teaching of quite specific strategies that are related to a specific problem or activity. And secondly, the relation between the strategy and task success is explicitly discussed. The second element is really important, but children right through primary school will on occasion learn how to do a strategy in one context, and when you ask them to give them a second context which is very similar, they don't produce that strategy when they could have done. And this has been shown to be a metacognitive deficit in young children, and which can be corrected if you get them to, when they're successful with the strategy, you then get them to discuss why they were more successful than when they did that than when they weren't doing it. And that makes a difference. And that's really the work from which we got the notion of children articulating their thinking. When they have to talk about it, it moves them from it being implicit, which lots of metacognition is implicit in young children, to making it explicit. And that really seems to, which Andy covered in his talk, really seems to make a huge difference, particularly with young children or children who are able learners, perhaps I'll put it like that. So the hypothesis of the chat project was that improving young children's ability to articulate their thinking and engage in exploratory talk, which is something that Neil Mercer describes, where an exploratory talk involves children using the rules for talk, and I've given some examples of activities related to that, children's rules for talk, and the way that Neil has done this in his work and we did it in the chat project is getting children to choose what they thought were good rules for talk and having other ones we suggested that were not such good ideas. We then engage the children in open-ended collaborative problem-solving activities. I've given you some examples of the sorts of things we did there. And the activities were preceded and followed by discussions between the teachers and children, in which the teachers introduced a model collaborative talk and metacognitive language. Again, I've given you an example of how that was done. So it's got these two elements of the children learning how to collaborate using talk, engaging in open-ended collaborative problem solving, and the discussions between the teachers and the children to make the implicit processes explicit. Sorry, I've gone the wrong way. We had, in this particular study, it was quite a small study, just to see whether it was possible to make it work. We went on to do larger studies subsequently. It involved children in 6 year 1 classes, age 5 to 6 years old, 53 children altogether in from those 6 classes. And we also had 3 control schools with 27 children, where they just carried on as normal, but we did the pre and post testing with them. The children worked in mixed ability groups of 3 on 8 open-ended collaborative activities over a 6-month period, and there were pre and post tests of overall self-regulation measured by an instrument we developed in an early project called The Child, which I'll show you later, and a direct test of metacognitive abilities using the train track. And these are the outcomes of, this is one of the main outcomes of this particular study, that the children in the intervention group improved their overall metacognitive scores as a composite of their ability to monitor what they're doing and their ability to control strategic performance, which are the 2 elements of metacognition. They were able to increase those significantly more than the children in the control classes. And there's a diagram there to show that actually, sadly, during the course of their normal year 1 experience, the control children's ability to metacognitive abilities actually declined slightly, while the children in the intervention group vastly increased their metacognitive abilities. This is with year 1 children, and you can see there that it says that the effect size was large. It was a 0.8 effect size. It was 0.62 for monitoring and 0.86 for control, so there's kind of average there. And just to show you how significant that is, I want to show you this chart, which was shown by Alan, of all the of a 50 study of 50 meta-analysis of educational interventions to find out which were the most effective in supporting learning. And you'll see that there you've got metacognition and self-regulation interventions generally at 0.7, to show that even with young children, by combining these 2 elements, we had achieved a 0.8 effect size. So quite an outstanding and almost unique effect size in early childhood education. Okay, so that's example number 1. I'll pass you over now to Penny, who will show you, talk you through example number 2. Over to you, Penny.
Okay, so I looked particularly at children's, the evidence of metacognitive thinking as expressed through children's language within the context of mathematics. Okay, David, next slide, please. So the questions were, press again, how do children talk mathematically independently, and what kinds of pedagogical approaches in the early years are effective in promoting children's use of mathematical language? And I was working particularly with reception classes. Okay, next one, David. You have to keep pressing, David. So the practitioners planned activities designed to promote use of mathematical language. They used role play, they used puppets, they used collaborative activities, particularly to do with construction, and peer tutoring turned out to be a very important one. They allowed the children to be videoed. The teachers looked at the video and they identified significant moments, the golden moments as they saw them. And then we together chatted about those moments and what we felt we learned from them. Okay, so I suppose what I'm wanting to do in the next 5 minutes or so is to show you how really simple classroom activities can be so productive in terms of generating evidence of metacognitive thinking. And so this was using one of those signing puppets with hands, and it was Rosie, who was in the role of being a little girl new to the class, and the rest of the class were teaching her how to count. And that proved to be a very strong way of getting children to articulate their thinking as they instructed her. Okay, David? Talking about strategies, and this was one of our favourite episodes, where the children were challenged to use the building blocks to build a house for that rather large toy dog called Paws. And so the children demonstrated a lot of strategic thinking. So does it really fit inside? Well, we don't know, but then Ruby puts him in it and says, yes, he can go to bed in it. So she had a definite strategy for solving the problem of would he fit inside. Next one. Was classroom, and thank goodness we now know differently that actually what we want to do is for children to talk to themselves as they're working. This is a lovely example of Jacob, a little boy, using language that he's heard his teacher using, and this is where we talked about making strategies explicit, to solve this takeaway. And he throws a dice. He throws a dice which generates a number 3. He's already been given a card which says 4. Right, that's 3. He takes the cubes. Right, there are 1, 2, 3, 4 takeaway. Now he shows some motivational thinking because he resists the distraction of another boy coming up who wants to talk to him. And Jacob says, no, I'm in the middle of my work. Assumes this self-commentary, and there was a lovely moment on the video where he's saying to himself, take away, take away, take away, take away, take away, and then says, damn, and he rubs out a number 3 that he's written and replaced it with a 4. So with apologies for his language, but nevertheless there's a nice example of self-correction, of recognizing that he's made a mistake and putting it right. And then takeaway 3 gets 1. So there we go. Next one. And this example is about children motivating each other. And it was in they're all reception classes, where the children had made a shop, and the shop was selling 3D shapes. That was what it sold. And there was one little boy in the classroom who was almost a selective mute, almost. He spoke very little in the class. And he was standing at the counter of the shape shop and pointed to a ball and said sphere. And the child who was being the shopkeeper immediately said, a sphere, you're right. And they were so excited that this little boy had actually said something, and not only had he said something, but it was appropriate and it was correct. And it was a really lovely moment of one child being so encouraging and so motivational to another. So these simple classroom activities were very, very rich in generating examples of speech representing metacognitive thinking. Next one, please, David. So then to think more about examples of pedagogy, and one of the prime ones, and not surprisingly, turned out to be the sustained shared conversations with adults. And this was a little girl called Siobhan, who they were playing with a puppet called Jack. The theme was Jack and the Beanstalk. And Siobhan was trying to help Jack count some beans. And she started off with a handful, and then she was a bit overwhelmed by the number. So the teacher encouraged her to think that maybe Jack was a bit overwhelmed by the number. And eventually, Siobhan decided that Jack could count 3 beans. So what she was doing was moderating the activity, not in fact to suit Jack's ability, but for her own. So we could see then the level at which she felt confident. Okay, next one. Here we are back with Paws. And again, listening to the children's conversations, so many examples of planning, predicting and problem solving. They put in a sloping brick. Well, what if he slides down there and bump his head? Well, we won't put it there because, oh, there's going to be 2 entrances. Puts in a second sloping block adjacent to the first. Right, that can make the ramp a bit bigger. Yes, so a lot of problem solving going on between those 2 little girls. So it's just showing how this giving children and meaningful activities can generate such rich conversation. Next one. And this is the final one I'm putting in. And this is, again, a reception class where when the teacher was there, you got a lot of, again, something that was addressed in the last talk you had, of subject knowledge, of children showing what they knew because the teacher was asking questions and they were showing, by responding, showing what they knew. But when the teacher was not there, the children took on those roles of coming up with strategies, problem solving, motivation, the kind of thing that normally they may have left to the teacher. But with the teacher not there, they took those roles on. And in this game, there was a lovely example of a very bossy little girl called Alice and a not quite so confident little girl called Kate who wanted to play the game. And Alice said, oh, it's easy peasy, lemon squeezy. You pick a card, and if the number's right, you put it on your board. If it's wrong, you put it back in the corner. You copy what I do. So Alice picks a card and looks at it and turns it to the back. And then says to Kate, right, now it's your turn. Come on, I had a go. Pick a card, pick one of them. Kate picked up a card and it showed a clock face at 6 o'clock. Alice, have you got that one? Well, what number is it? It's 6. You've got to have a 6. Kate tentatively points to a square on the board. Alice, is that a 6? Is that a 6? Yes, it's a 6. So Kate puts the card in place, and then Alice, who's completely taken charge of the game, says, right, it's Wayne's turn now. So there's this lovely example of the little girl completely taking on, as she saw it, the role of teacher. This is what the teacher said about it. She was bowled over. I won't read that to you, perfectly capable of reading it yourselves. But she could not get over the fact that those reception-aged children played for over 20 minutes in a very, very organised way, using all the ordinary adopting game conventions, taking turns, understanding procedures involved, being really quite formal, no arguing, no one saying you're cheating. All the collaborative activities we had were as productive as that. Okay, David, back to you.
Thanks, Penny. Right, okay, so just to finish off then, we've just got 5 minutes left. Ways of assessing metacognition and self-regulation in children. And going to show you, I suppose, 4 basic types of different ways of doing it. Through observation of playful activities, children always, as you know, perform at their highest level in play, and so you're going to find out much more about what they can really do when you know they're fully motivated and engaged. An observation scale that we developed in an earlier project that might be of use to some of you, and then direct assessment activities and metacognitive questioning. So I'll just go through these quite quickly and then time will be up. So the first one you've actually got in the reading I sent. This is this lovely example of a 5-year-old, a Russian girl, 5 years, 2 months, engaging in the shopping game, and this was discussed in the reading. So I won't spend any time on that, but a very clear example of if you know what you're looking for, how you can observe metacognitive thinking and learning going on in young children. This study is a brilliant example of how powerful play is as a motivator and how much it helps children to develop their metacognitive abilities. And in this case, it's supporting children to regulate their attention. This was a task where children had to watch a very boring screen that was showing different objects facing them, and then to the side there was another screen that was showing some very entertaining cartoons, and the children were told that they had to press a button every time they saw a piece of cheese on the screen, which is very boring for them. And so here on the chart, this is the result for 4-year-olds and then 6-year-olds of how well they managed to do that in terms of the percentage of time over a 10-minute period that they were on task. So instead of 10 minutes, the 4-year-olds were only managing to concentrate for 2 minutes, and the 6-year-olds were somewhere about 3.5 minutes out of the 10 when they were being themselves. Then they were asked to do the same task, to concentrate on the cheese screen and ignore the cartoon, to do it as they would have done it, as their mum or dad would have done it. And they all got slightly better when they were pretending to be their mum or their dad, or a third person. But then in the final trial, they were asked to pretend to do it how Batman would do it. So they all got very excited, and I think they were given Batman capes and so on to wear when they were doing this. So they really got into role. And they got even better at it when they were pretending to be Batman. In play, in this playful context of pretending to Batman, even the 4-year-olds were able to significantly increase their ability to concentrate and focus on the task, as opposed to being distracted by the cartoon. And the 6-year-olds, you can see, were now doing, 6 minutes out of the 10, they were focusing on the task. So it's a very significant improvement between just doing it as a task for no apparent reason and doing it in a playful context, and supporting children's abilities to focus and to concentrate. And of course, that's one of the main predictors of levels of academic achievement. This was another example of an observation. I won't run this because it takes a couple of minutes and we're nearly out of time, but there's a little boy organising the chairs. He's got teddy bears and he's got a Goldilocks doll, and the teacher's asked him if he can go and put the chairs out for Goldilocks and the 3 bears. And there's a lovely moment in this when he gets the sequence wrong and he realizes that he's got a teddy bear but he hasn't got a chair, so he has to put the teddy bear back and get another chair. But he spots his error and corrects it, which is a very simple and clear example of monitoring his own performance and then correcting his mistake through his metacognitive abilities. This is this instrument called the Children's Independent Learning Development instrument, CHILD, which we developed in a previous project. And these were the 22 statements organized under 4 areas of self-regulation: emotional regulation, pro-social regulation, cognitive regulation, and motivational regulation. Organized in these 4 areas. These were the statements that distinguished the children who were developing good levels of metacognition and self-regulation, and children who were not, who were doing quite poorly in that area. And so this can be used as a way of assessing children, and actually this has been used throughout the primary school and even into the first couple of years of secondary school it still works very well with different age groups, although it was particularly it was developed through a study with 3, 4 and 5-year-olds. And teachers have also used this as a kind of audit of their own practice, because you might look at something and say, well, I don't know if the children in my class can do that. For example, find own resources without adult help, or is aware of other feelings and helps and comforts them. I haven't observed that, or I haven't set up a situation where that would become evident. And so, it can support you to develop your practice. This is the train track task. I've got videos, but we've not got time to show them, unfortunately, where the children are shown an example like a circle or a tree shape, and then they're asked to build it with a train track. And you can see examples of the children monitoring their own progress through the task and how well they're getting on, of them using various strategic ways of solving the task. And you can also see examples of lack of monitoring, where they get distracted, or lack of strategic control, where they engage in what's called perseveration, which is where a child tries something, it doesn't work, and then they try the same thing again and it doesn't work, and then they try the same thing again. So a lack of ability to modify their strategies. We've done a similar task with building Lego models. So the children are shown these pictures and they're given a bunch of Lego, and you can video them doing it, and then you can see where they're noticing mistakes, to what extent they're planning, and so on and so forth. And finally, metacognitive questioning. Here are some examples of how you can do that in relation to the train track task, in relation to the Lego building, or indeed, as we did in the chat project, how you can do it in relation to floating and sinking objects.